Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is sponsored by PCS Jobs. APN listeners can post for free by going to arcpodnet.com/PCS. That's $50 off the normal price at www.arcpodnet.com/PCS.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals. All these things we make no apology are the study of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs, no we don't do...
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 73. I'm your host, Sarah Head, with my co-host today, Jeb Card. And today we have special guest, Jens Notroff from Berlin, Germany, who works on the Gobekli Tepe project in Turkey. Today we're discussing a recently published academic paper titled Decoding Göbekli Tepe with Archaeoastronomy. What Does the Fox Say? By Martin B. Sweetman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis. We apologize in advance for any name mispronunciations. My guests and I discuss the validity of the findings in this report, what the controversies are surrounding the findings of this report, and what findings the Gobekli Tepe project has found in its decades-long excavation of the site. Get ready to think critically.
You will see are a staple of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah Head, and I am joined today by my co-host, Jeb Card. How's it going, Jeb?
I'm no longer mostly sick, and it's a nice day. And oh my God, it's been a storm of crazy archaeological crap this week.
Seriously, and to help us navigate this storm, we actually have special guests with us today, Jens Notroff from the Gobekli Tepe project, who's going to help us suss through some of this asteroid comet stuff. Jeb, you want to give us a real quick breakdown of what the shitstorm is?
Yeah, I mean, basically, a few days ago, I think it may have been last Friday, a paper broke from the journal, the peer-reviewed open source journal. And open source means you can download it, you can look at it. It is open source, but it is peer-reviewed. It's a peer-reviewed journal, Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry. And the title of this is Decoding Gobekli Tepe with Archaeoastronomy. What Does the Fox Say? It's by Martin B. Sweetman and Dimitrios Tsikritsis, and I apologize if I've mispronounced that. And they are both affiliated with the School of Engineering at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland. And they have some fairly extraordinary claims that, if you have followed our show and if you are sort of familiar with a lot of extreme claims about archaeology, we'll relate to some of those and we'll get more into that. But we were lucky to be able to get somebody who actually is researching this site in person.
Yeah, so Jens, can you give us a quick bio of who you are and tell us about the Gobekli Tepe project that you work on?
Yeah, of course. Thanks for having me on the show, by the way.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I'm really happy to be part of this. My name is Jens Notroff. I'm a research assistant at the German Archaeological Institute at the Orient Department. And we are where the Göbekli Tepe research project actually is based. So it's a project funded by the German Research Foundation, and we're doing research where roughly since 20 years, a bit more than 20 years. The site was discovered in 1995 by Klaus Schmidt, the former head of project.
Right.
And we're excavating 2 seasons a year. So I personally spent the last 10 years, a couple of weeks each spring and autumn on the site. And I imagine I have at least some overview about what's going on in the excavations, at least.
And you have before I get that, you have also put yourself out there very much in social media. You write a lot. Yeah. You do a lot of public outreach.
Yeah. The point is with a site like Göbekli Tepe, sooner or later, you encounter a lot of, let's call it, strange theories, the whole ancient alien stuff and ancient super civilizations and so on. And it bugged us at some point that our point of view was never noticed because, of course, we were not visible where these discussions happened, in the internet and in the more popular media. And that's why we started to somehow claim a little bit of the narrative back and being present in these media as well.
That's awesome. Can you tell us what your research has found out about Göbekli Tepe?
Okay, I'm trying to put 20 years of research into a nutshell now. Right. Okay, so far, it's not the oldest architecture at all, or the oldest building at all.
Oh, really?
But it's the oldest yet known monumental structures. So, I mean, we don't know if these people didn't build like shelters or anything else to live in, but it's the monumentality we want to stress here.
When you say monumentality, I have seen pictures of these T-shaped. I think a lot of people are drawn to it because it has a vague similarity to Stonehenge in terms of like its visual.
Yeah, it's visually similar. It's a megalithic site.
Right.
Yeah, for sure.
How tall are those T-shapes?
Okay, these circular enclosures. These are the part of the older layer, the older architecture, and these circular enclosures are formed of T-shaped pillars in a circle. They are up to 4 meter height, but they are surrounding an even larger pair in the center. And these central pillars are 5.5 meters high. So that's quite monumental, if you ask me.
That's big.
Yeah. And the interesting point is that at least these central pillars are clearly anthropomorphic. They have arms, they have hands, they have belts and loincloths. So they are meant to look like humans, but pretty larger than life human beings. So that's why we carefully think about them being maybe on another level, another sphere than the naturalistic human life-size depiction we also have. So that's where the interpretation also comes into the whole narrative. Yeah.
There's an old joke in archaeology. If we don't know what it is, therefore it's ritual. But if you're making a giant monument to somebody that's 15 feet tall, the monument is, that it's not out the realm of possibility that there's some ritual thing going on here.
Yeah, and I mean, we know how settlements look in this time. So we know settlement architecture from other sites, and they look different. So there is not, at least at current state of excavation, there's no domestic architecture on the side of Göbekli Tepe. But what we also know from these settlements is that each settlement excavated on a certain scale has at least one communal building. And it's these communal buildings which are resembling the structures of Göbekli Tepe. So to put it in at Göbekli Tepe, we have an agglomeration of special purpose buildings, if you want to put it like that. Yeah.
And it's sort of like a super version of what we might see in everyday pieces. Now, you keep seeing time. When are we talking about?
Would be a good idea to give us a chronology here. So it's the end of the last ice age. We're at least in the older layers we excavated. We're in the 10th millennium BC. I think the oldest radiocarbon date we have as of yet is coming from a wall plaster in one of the enclosures, and it's about 9,900 Cal BC, if I'm not mistaken. Something like 9,899.
So just under 12,000 years ago, and I think we may have skipped this over. This is in southern Turkey.
It is in southern Turkey. Yeah, it's not far from the Syrian border, actually. Yeah.
Okay.
Now, Jens, how does this date that you have there, how does that apply to the Younger Dryas, which is also being touted in these articles?
It's right at the end of this Younger Dryas phenomenon.
So it's at the end of the Younger Dryas.
Yeah. Contrary to what's proposed in the paper, it's rather at the end. So the ice age is just over. People are settling in a new climatic optimum. Yeah.
I have a vague idea what the Younger Dryas is, but I think you're about to ask, what is the Younger Dryas?
I was going to ask, what is the Younger Dryas? So we say ice age, but that doesn't cover it completely.
Yeah, I don't want to go into detail because it's a huge discussion and so on. But it's just a climate situation where the temperatures drop again, and it's sometimes referred to as a little ice age. So it's just a cold period, if we want to.
Yeah, well, I mean, and I am not an expert, but my understanding of this is that people talk about the glacial maximum, the last glacial maximum, about 18,000 years ago, and then after that, global temperature starts to warm up. It's colder than today, but it's warmer than it had been.
Yep.
And then when this happens, so that would be about 13,000 years ago. The Younger Dryas. Yeah. There is a sudden drop in temperature, and it is very quick that it happens, and it lasts for about 1,000 years. Now, my understanding, and again, this is actually something I think we'll set the stage here because we're going to have to come back to it. This article can't be understood with what we're about to talk about. Yeah. My understanding is that the general belief, although there is some discussion of this, is that with the melting of glaciers in North America and a lot of fresh water basically coming out of what becomes the St. Lawrence River Valley, this modifies the salinity of the North Atlantic current, basically the Gulf Stream, and makes it change course. This causes the climate fluctuation. Again, this is the general belief as my understanding. Feel free to correct me. And this lasts for about 1,000 years, and then it pretty rapidly re-warms up again. But this crashes stuff back to a more glacial climate. Is that about right?
Yeah. To put it really short, that's a rough sketch of the big discussion going on. Right. Yeah.
But there are some people that say something else, and we'll come back to that.
Yeah, just one more point, because I did not come to what we think Göbekli Tepe actually was or might have been. It is situated on the highest point in the landscape, and it's not exactly a preferable settlement situation, but it's very visible. And we think it might have served some kind of gathering site. Mobile cultures or certain mobile groups need to meet at certain occasions to exchange information, marriage partners, and so on. And we know this from ethnology and ethnographic analogies, actually. So they establish certain places to meet. And we think Göbekli Tepe might have been one of such places, gathering places for the local groups roaming the area around Göbekli Tepe.
That was actually something I both wanted to explain for our audience, and actually a legitimate, question I had. My general understanding is that one of the reasons everybody's eyes popped is that this is not only the oldest monumental architecture in the world, but it is, and this is actually a question, because I looked this up and I got a couple of conflicting answers. It is generally believed to be before domestication of plants and animals in the Middle East, or right around the time it's happening.
We're at the doorstep. So as of yet, any bones we found and any plant remains we found are from wild species. We don't have evidence for domesticated animals or plants as of yet from the site. But it's, you have to take this with a grain of salt, because domestication takes quite some time to become visible in the bone material. So
it's not like turning on a light switch. This was a long process.
It takes time.
But the reason why and I think one of the reasons why so many people have glommed, I think there's one reason. It's at a very specific time that a lot of people have an interest in. We'll get back to that. But the larger reason why is when you say monumental architecture, for a very long time, archaeologists and anthropologists would say, big monumental architecture must be associated with large farming communities, even though, as you point out, there are ethnographic counterexamples. But this thing being so early, and more or less, even if there's a tiny bit of agriculture, we're not talking about agricultural large societies. People were like, what the hell? Why is this here? And as we'll talk about, it may be not so surprising. I'm increasingly thinking of this place like I think of, say, Poverty Point in North America. And actually, there's the Maya side of Ceibal. This has also been recently suggested that it becomes a focal place for mobile groups. But that's why people put so much attention on it.
Yeah, and I mean, 20 years ago, no one would have believed that hunter-gatherer societies or groups could show such stratification, which apparently might be necessary to create these large communal projects. But that is why, I have some weak spot for fancy ideas, so I'm not going to say that's ridiculous, and we don't have to. We are not going to discuss new ideas. But at least we need to see the background and go into context and evidence. Exactly. Yeah.
So we know what Gobekli Tepe is now. We're thinking it's a larger community site, maybe a temple. But the interesting thing
Sanctuaries, temple,
right. And the interesting thing about the site is that it was built at a time when we're currently believing that people were very hunter-gatherers still. They were still very nomadic, so they're moving around a lot. There's not a lot of permanent settlements, and there's no definitive evidence of agriculture and domestication yet. But as you were saying, it's a long process, so that may have been happening. We just don't see it yet.
Yeah.
The problem that has come up in my Twitter feed over the last 24 hours and across like every social media outlet I have is here was this paper that Jeb mentioned earlier that has been published. It's got a cute little name, but what they're claiming is that all of the work that the archaeologists have done in the past is incorrect, that Göbekli Tepe is actually an observatory, and that specifically there is a astronomical record on one of the pillars that records an asteroid impact.
I think they call it a comet strike. I think they focus on
strike,
that.
Yes, you're right.
For some specific reasons, because they also warn about a future threat to the world.
Yeah, we'll get, like Jeb likes to say, we'll get back to that one specifically. But this particular comet strike, they claim, ended the Younger Dryas, and we know that from some other evidence. Now, if you see the way that this is presented in the media, it is put out there in a very ambiguous way, to the point where the authors of this paper are sometimes actually called archaeologists. They are not. They are engineers. They are attributed to having knowledge that they do not have. And it also makes it sound as if all archaeologists everywhere agree with the conclusions that were drawn by this paper.
Well, I do want to add an addendum to that. I don't want to think about it in the sense of knowledge they do or don't have. I want to look at that because if this was written by an archaeologist who had gone to all the perfect grad schools and all that, it would still have huge problems. This is
and I would still say that they're being attributed with knowledge that they can't possibly or don't have, because some of the claims made are just out there.
I encourage everyone, even if they don't have the proper education or the background we have, to come up with ideas. It's never bad to come up with ideas, but you have to at least find some proof to support it and evidence.
Exactly.
And it never hurts
to not ignore proof that's already there.
Exactly. To just consult the published literature on the site and on such things. Yeah.
So Jens, can you tell us your project? You post. They have a blog. We'll link it in the show notes. And you posted a nice bulleted kind of response to the paper itself. I don't want to get
the Tepe Telegrams. It's tepetelegrams.wordpress.com.
Yeah, it's a lovely website or a lovely blog. I went and checked it out.
Thank you.
Oh, and I wrote down. I have 3 points that I pulled out of all of the points that you put in there, and I'm not saying that these are the most important points. These are just the ones that resonate the most with me, because they're things that Jeb and Ken and I have harped on over and over and over on the show. And if you would like to kind of go over your post first, and then we'll come back to my favorite points. But can you tell us about your rebuttal?
Yeah, maybe I just start because you mentioned the comet impact. I start with that. They are saying that on this peculiar pillar, we call it Pillar 43. Actually, the name Vulture Stone itself, interestingly, derives already from.
Wait, it's called the Watcher Stone. They call it the Watcher Stone.
Yeah, but that's a term already borrowed from fringe literature, from pseudo-archaeological.
It refers to giants in the Book of Genesis.
Yeah, so we strictly number the pillars in order of their discovery. So for us, it's Pillar 43. They say it depicts an event on the onset of the Younger Dryas. So if you remember the radiocarbon dates I just mentioned, for the very same enclosure this pillar was found in, we have quite a gap of about 1,000 years.
Basically the entire Younger Dryas.
Yeah, so we are talking about a document here remembering or commemorating an event happening 1,000 years earlier. I mean, of course, we could argue that the wall plaster was done sometime later when the pillars, we even have evidence for reuse of all the pillars, but 1,000 years still seem quite a leap to me.
Yeah, so, it's not the worst problem here, but it's something worth noting. Yes.
No, but it's a good place to start.
Yeah.
I just wanted to put this into perspective.
Oh, no. I absolutely agree.
The second thing would be we still don't know if these enclosures were really often in reconstructions. You see a white field and an enclosure under an open sky, and this is where all these orientation discussions coming from. The pillars are oriented to solstices and what else? Certain stars, aligned to certain stars. But actually, there is quite some strong possibility that these were subterranean structures. And we even have a building historian who was convincingly discussing that they may have roofs. So you still can observe the stars from a roof. That's not a problem. But the orientation of certain pillars or the orientation through these so-called porthole stones would actually, at the moment, just lead into a wall or into soil would be more difficult if these were really subterranean roofed structures, actually.
And one thing we should point out, I mean, archaeoastronomy's been around for a long while in the sense of people wanting to look at alignments, but there was a period starting really in the 1970s where people like E.C. Krupp and especially Anthony Avini were like, look, if we're going to be serious, we have to be very specific about these alignments and what could really be seen. Yeah. And you don't always see that in these discussions, because here's the thing. You put a lot of standing things up, at some point, point A, point B is going to hit something interesting, point C. Yeah. Like that's just a reality.
We've pointed out before on the show that you could hypothetically go out into your backyard, pick a random feature of your backyard, and it will align to something.
Yeah. And it's even harder if there was a roof over your backyard.
Right. And
yeah. Another point, and admittedly, I'm on thin ice here because I am no expert in archaeoastronomy, but to me, it seems quite a stretch that asterisms and star constellations should be constant over cultures and such a long period of time. I mean, of course, the stars are still in the sky and people looking up, seeing things there, but that they should connect the very same stars into similar constellations, that is something that I have actually problems to believe.
That's actually my biggest. I mean, I have some other issues with the backdrop, but from a pure evidence perspective, that is my biggest problem. And here I can bring a little New World archaeoastronomy to, I think, kind of make a point.
Okay.
Several of the criticisms pointed out that, and I think you may have mentioned this, Scorpion's actually not so bad, because there does seem to be kind of around the world, people look at this constellation that various cultures see as a scorpion, like Scorpion. That one actually kind of stands out. But after that, these are very arbitrary. I mean, most famously, there were Andean peoples that instead of using the stars to make constellations, used the spaces between stars. They used the dark spots. In Mesoamerica, amongst the Maya at least, Orion's belt, like the three stars, were actually the three hearthstones of creation on the back of a turtle, and they did not connect to all the rest of the stuff that's Orion. In North America, those three stars were involved potentially in the Mississippian Society with the eye and hand motif that involved the pathway to the Milky Way and the other world at various times of year. And in this paper, they start throwing around like Libra and other much later constellations. And while I suppose, given that the zodiac was to some degree, and I am not an astronomical historian, so maybe somebody could comment on that, but this is the region of the world where those are invented, but way, way later.
Jens also points out in his article, or in his blog post, that we have to first assume that the sky that we see today is exactly the same or close enough 12,000 years ago.
My understanding is that you had some comments in your thing. You had some comments on the blog that
exactly,
that.
And they said basically it with a minor margin it would be a rather similar, or you can just calculate it back with computer programs. So they may have a point there. As I said, I'm not an expert, but it is puzzling to me if we really are looking to the same images. Yeah.
The thing that does move with that, when people talk about the zodiac, they're actually talking about, when they talk about your zodiac sign, or like, it's in this the month of Aquarius or whatever, they're talking about where the sun is in relation to the Earth. That has changed a bit. That changes to some degree, but that's not what we're talking about here. So we're talking about minor differences, but it's huge potential cultural differences. That's the real problem.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's go to break real quick, and when we come back, we'll start digging into some specifics here.
The ARCHAEOTech podcast, hosted by Chris Webby Webster and Chris Boone Sims, is a show dedicated to the technology of the modern archaeologist. On the ARCHAEOTech podcast, we interview people using interesting tech, and we dig into the issues, advantages, and try to uncover the disadvantages of the digital age and going paperless. We all know there is no paper in the future, or should we say, paper has no future. Check out the show at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/ARCHAEOTech. Let's get back to the show.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
And we are back, and we are still talking about Göbekli Tepe with Jens Notroff from Germany here. And so we do want to talk about the images that are on the pillars, and that's actually going to lead us into a larger discussion. So before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the media's representation of this, what I was able to glean from the media about where this concept came from that's being presented in this paper. And it does trace directly back to Ignatius Donnelly but there's this interesting article that was linked in one of the media articles that I wrote, and that will be in the show notes. And there was an interview with Graham Hancock back in 2015. And what's interesting about this is that it's very almost verbatim-y what Graham Hancock said in that interview with what is being said about the paper and this discovery of the comet and the dating thing. And Graham Hancock is also the individual who tried to align the Great Pyramids with the 3 stars in the Belt of Orion, and it turns out that the only way that would actually be real is if you flip them upside down and reverse them.
Well, he's working with Robert Bauval. All right, so what this is part of a much larger tradition. You mentioned Ignatius Donnelly. Let's start right there. Ignatius Donnelly is the guy we've talked about before that gives us the modern concept of Atlantis, the super hyper diffusionary civilization. He also wrote a book called Ragnarok, the Age of Fire and Gravel. And I'm going to literally read the very first paragraph from Wiki to you right here. In Ragnarok, Donnelly argues that an enormous comet hit the Earth 12,000 years ago, resulting in widespread fires, floods, poisonous gases, and unusually vicious and prolonged winters. The catastrophe destroyed a more advanced civilization, forcing its terrified population to seek shelter in caves. As cave dwellers, they lost all knowledge of art, literature, music, philosophy, and engineering. And that is pretty much what a whole slew of people like Graham Hancock, like Andrew Collins, and others. In fact, there's a fantastic article, I want to say it's in 2006, but I could be wrong about that, from a UCL, University College London, edited volume on consuming Egypt. And there are 2 authors in there that write a really cool article, and they are Lynn Picknett and Clive Prince. Now, they write about stargates, and they worked with other people they're the type of people and the people they work with who show up routinely on like Ancient Aliens and so forth. And they wrote a really cool article for this University College London thing, more or less describing the school of alternative Egyptology that had emerged on the Giza Plateau in really the 1990s, with Graham Hancock being the sort of chief standard bearer. And they all pretty much have this concept of a ancient lost civilization that is destroyed at the end of the Ice Age, pretty much like Atlantis. And it's spread out, and the memory of this catastrophe is found in various monumental structures around the world, and in various versions of this catastrophe may repeat soon, and we are being foolish to ignore these ancient signs from the lost wise past. And that's pretty much what we find in the article we're discussing.
Well, I believe Graham Hancock gives us the date of 2030 as to when the next comet's supposed to come and kill us all. So we have a new end times date to look forward to. But what I found it interesting that what Graham Hancock's interview, a lot of what he was saying is almost directly repeated in the parts of the paper that correlate. The whole thing with, first off, they're even at Göbekli Tepe. The date is almost identical. It's almost as if they started with the date and then incidentally found something that correlated with that. And the other thing, Well, hang on.
I want to slightly revise before you continue. I do want to slightly revise something I just said. The paper we're talking about does not talk about a super ancient civilization.
No, it does not.
Things they cite in the paper and the larger context, that's the larger context, but they don't explicitly say that in the paper. They just cite people that are talking about this at that date.
Right.
Yeah.
So they are using as reference people who do push this theory, which is questionable in my opinion. That's my opinion. I would not have used that as a reference myself unless I was debunking it. The other thing that I found interesting was the specific use of the pillar that they are using, and they call it the vulture the vulture
Stone.
pillar. Yeah, the vulture stone. Because they look like vultures. They look like vultures to me. I don't know if that's what they really are, but to me they do actually.
We agree. We agree that they're vultures. You can see it in the neck and the beak, and that's not the problem here, I think.
No, it's not. The animal is not the problem.
Yeah.
They vaguely look like the vultures in the murals at Çatalhöyük, right? Like they're kind of similar looking.
And
Well, I mean,
there you
they're
have the
vultures.
point. That's a tradition already, because we're talking about pre-pottery Neolithic iconography here. And this is something in a much, much larger context than only Göbekli Tepe's pillars, actually. These images appear on stone vessels, on placards, on shaft straighteners, on the pillars, on wall paintings. So we know...
So, Jens, what you're saying, it sounds like, is that every single object they had was a warning about. I'm joking, but you're saying this iconography is found everywhere and not just here.
Exactly. And interestingly, I mean, they just picked Pillar 43 because of this really impressive decoration, and I agree. It's the coolest pillar we have around in this enclosure for sure. But it's not the only one.
Well, it looks like they picked that one specifically because it's one that Graham Hancock has addressed himself. And that's where the correlations start to make me go, because they are directly picking from him, it looks like.
Okay. Another problem actually is that, I mean, we have, in the meantime, we have more than 60 pillars, and a lot of them are richly decorated. The point is that even Pillar 43 has much more decorations than are discussed in the paper, because the other sides also bear reliefs and they are not at all mentioned. So it looks a little bit like cherry picking certain elements to just support an idea. Interestingly, we have, if we look closer into the iconography, we even have certain different foci in each enclosure. So each enclosure has another animal in the focus. So why it's birds, mostly vultures, in enclosure D. Enclosure C has a lot of birds, a lot of boars. There are snakes in another enclosure. So we are interpreting this as, and of course this is questionable as well, as some kind of a social component, maybe like totem animals or something. So different groups active in different enclosures. So you really have to look at the context, the whole context of an enclosure, and not just a couple of pictures on a single pillar. So that's a bit difficult in my opinion, actually.
Or alternatively, maybe every single enclosure is a memory of a different horrifying massacre. So maybe the one is the snake uprising. And another one is when the slugs are anyway. But
so that's interesting, Jens, that each room within the larger site has a specific animal that it seems to have more of in its representation. That's what you're saying?
Yeah, even there's more to the peculiar iconography of Pillar 43. So the vulture and the headless man, this is actually, it's almost a topos in pre-pottery Neolithic iconography. We have in Çatalhöyük, for example, also depictions of vultures and headless people. We have at Göbekli, we have sculptures of birds crouched on separated human heads. We have even separated sculpture heads in the filling of these enclosures. And this actually is interesting if you get an idea about Neolithic mortuary ritual in that time and area, where they have showed a certain concern for the disarticulation of bodies. So you know the famous Jericho skulls, for example, which were retrieved and replastered and exhibited. So I think there's some much more complex narrative going on here. These are not just symbols substitutional for events or ideas. This is a whole narrative, actually.
For our listeners, there are several sites, with the ones from Jericho being the most famous, where these heads that we believe are probably relatives or ancestors of the people who did this were made to look more lifelike. They had clay and plaster put on them. They would have shell or a stone and other materials to make the eyes look alive, and other elements. They were in essence I don't want to call it taxidermy, but I mean they were reconstructing the dead.
Yeah, you are saying that there are human skulls that have had this material applied to them to give them a more lifelike appearance.
Yes.
And this is where the depictions become even more interesting, because this combination of vultures and dead bodies is quite interesting if you think about the excarnation process behind these rituals. I mean, you need an excarnated skull to replaster it. And even today in certain areas in Asia, there is this, it's called sky burial, where vultures are actively helping in deflesh the bodies. And this was put forward as interpretation for these depictions in Çatalhöyük, for example, but also at Göbekli Tepe, that maybe necrophagous animals somehow played a role in the excarnation of the bodies. And while we don't have proof at Göbekli as of yet, we didn't find much human bones. But what we did find is a lot of bird bones from corvids and also vultures, so in particular necrophagous birds all around the site. So I'm not saying it's the smoking gun evidence, but something was going on.
That's interesting. That's interesting.
Attracting these birds. Yeah.
But this is good though, because what Jens is providing us with is evidence that allows us to make a guess, a hypothesis about the use of that space. What we're being provided.
It's all published evidence, by the way.
Yeah, and you do mention that in your rebuttal that this type of published evidence was ignored somehow by the authors of the paper that we've been discussing, where they assign a new purpose to this space without any actual evidence to back that new assignment up. Yeah. Do you want to talk about that some?
Well, I mean, I know that there's plenty of academic literature out there, so it's really impossible to get everything. You can't read everything. But I think if you're looking into a peculiar question, it would at least a simple Google search actually would lead to our full publication list on the blog. So
they cite Schmidt a couple of times.
Yeah, but older stuff as far as I remember.
Older stuff, yeah. There's 2001 preliminary report, 2003, and it looks like it's basically your field, like what we call an Informe in Latin America, the 2003
field reports.
Yeah. So not final analysis. For our listeners, if you don't know, we always write up when we do something, we always write up an initial field report. What did we dig? What did we specifically find? Pictures, all of that, as just like an initial record. But what we really end up working with is, and then we publish an analysis to answer specific questions. And that's not what that is. And then the last one is 2010, Gobekli Tepe, the Stone Age sanctuaries. This looks to be a new results of ongoing excavations with a special focus on sculptures and high reliefs. And that's in Documenta Prehistorica.
Yeah. It's I think it was some kind of conference. Yeah.
So they didn't. So it sounds like they're not. Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say another one in the same thing. So I'm not an archaeoastronomer, but I do have at least a little background in that. And I found it interesting that they did not cite a lot of archaeoastronomy. I mean, they cited a little. They certainly didn't cite any history of, as far as I can tell, history of the zodiacal asterisms and constellations. Other than there's one that points to a hyperdiffusion. A Paleolithic planetarium underground, the Cave of Lascaux, which is on migration and diffusion, which if you go there, a lot of the stuff there is the kind of stuff we cover on this show. It's not an academic journal, as far as I could tell. I could be wrong about that. And yeah, it's not exactly like if I wanted to do this, I would want to have all the possible evidences of continuity until you do have a historical record that talks about these constellations. You've already given us more continuity to sites like Çatalhöyük later than I believe is in the paper. And there's certainly no history of these asterisms that would even hint at it going back to the Ice Age and what we're seeing here. And again, maybe I missed that somewhere, but I don't think so.
I think so neither, yeah.
No, there a lot of the takedowns that I have seen, as well as Jens, because there have been several archaeologists who have responded to this, not just at the poor handling of it by the media, but also by the paper itself. Mm-hmm. And a lot of their complaints are the resources that are used and the citations that are made in the paper are not up to par with what we would expect for an article being published in a peer-reviewed journal. And I mean, say what you want, academia can be rough, and they have very, very high standards as to what they want to see when something goes through publication. And to see a paper like this get through, it's raised a lot of eyebrows and a lot of ire, I would say. Some people have been
not the last time we're going to be talking about that.
No, it's not, actually. There was a lot of stuff happened this week. We'll be covering it.
Yes. Yeah.
there's a lot of weird shit that went down. But yeah, so Jens, can you tell us about, like, what was your first reaction when you saw this come through? What was your first, like, as honest as you can be on air reaction when you saw this come through? And other than writing this rebuttal, what are some of the steps that your group, your project is trying to go through? Because it directly affects you. So what are you guys going through to kind of like reverse some of this here?
Someone pointed out the paper in an email to me, I think last Thursday. And I clicked on the link and I just read the headline and I thought, yeah, I don't spend time reading that. We get a lot of emails going into this direction. We get plenty of theories and suggestions, and you at some point you just start sorting things out if you read certain keywords.
And as we had talked about, this is not the first time that people with extreme claims have centered on Göbekli Tepe. That was my first reaction too. Yeah.
So I was just skipping the paper and saying, yeah, okay, it's I didn't even look up the journal. So but when my colleague pointed out that the paper actually had in DOI, so it looked serious. Still, I didn't went into it until the first media reports popped up. And then I said, oh, it's more serious when you thought. So maybe you have a look into the paper. And yeah, already while reading the paper, I came up with the points I finally listed on the blog. So I felt the need to at least address some kind of reply, because I don't have hard feelings to any of the authors. I don't know them personally. And actually, I encourage if people come up with ideas. But there are certain things in need to be discussed. And this is in particular the archaeology of the site. It's not a dark room. We have 20 years of research have provided plenty of material as of yet. And I think this is something that should be considered at least.
Well, let me ask then, you've made it quite clear I think we can say this safely. They're clearly ignoring a lot of work that you've put out there, not just you, but your whole team and other people, and people that have worked on Chateau Hiuka put out there, and other people that have worked on the larger context. That work is not there. It should be there. Do you find this? You said you have no hard feelings.
Yeah.
Are you at all do you feel disrespected at all?
Well, I'm more surprised that there is a large apparatus on pre-Proto Neolithic iconography which is not reflected in the paper. And even if you come up with new ideas, you at least have to point out that there are already some ideas how to interpret these things.
Yeah. You can say somebody's wrong, but you have to deal with it.
Yeah, and I think this is the most annoying thing for me, where it's just it looks like we finally decoded this and no one else ever had an idea what's going on here, and that's just not true.
Yeah, well, just go on Google Earth and find a bunch of Maya cities that are actually farm fields.
Yeah, something like
we've talked about
gold, Jeff. Velocity of gold.
Yes.
You can find that on Google in 5 minutes.
Yes.
All right, let's go to break real quick, and when we come back, we will we'll wrap this sucker up. So.
Hosted by archaeologist Emily Long, Trial Tales is an archaeology podcast with stories told by archaeologists about the crazy world of archaeology. Emily weaves a tale of wonder and excitement with her intriguing questions and imaginative editing skills. Check out Trial Tales today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/Trial Tales. Now let's get back to the show.
What's the easiest choice you can make? Window instead of middle seat? Picking a vendor who sends a great gift basket? Outsourcing business tasks you hate? What about selling with Shopify? Whether you're selling a little or a lot, Shopify helps you do your thing, however you cha-ching. Shopify is the global commerce platform that helps you sell at every stage of your business. From the launch your online shop stage to the first real-life store stage, all the way to the did we just hit 1 million orders stage. Shopify's there to help you grow. Whether you're selling scented soap or offering outdoor outfits, Shopify helps you sell. Wherever and whatever you're selling, Shopify's got you covered. Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/try. Go to shopify.com/try now to grow your business, no matter what stage you're in. Shopify.com/try.
And we are back. And so, as just pointed out, we've kind of covered this. There's not a lot to this, but there is, because it's gotten blown way gotten blown up quite a bit on the media, and it's getting a lot of credit where personally I don't think it deserves that kind of credit. I don't know what your guys' opinions are. I'm
about to say a thing that might surprise our audience very slightly. I actually don't entirely blame reporters for this one.
Oh, I don't
because
either.
Well, I sometimes have bad mouth reporting on the show, but it's in a peer-reviewed journal.
Exactly.
And like this one, again, we're going to be talking about some other things soon. This one immediately leapt out to us because we know the background of people that are trying to argue for some vague form of a super civilization or an Atlantis or something about 11,000 years ago. This is a very familiar claim to us. It goes back to Donnelly. If you're an expert in crazy bullshit like we have all become, this is very familiar. So immediately tripped our wires. But none of that's in the paper other than you have to know the citation. So this is not obvious necessarily as something that would be in the realm of, say, the Watchers that got mentioned. This is not something that would immediately jump out. So it's a peer-reviewed journal. It's something that to a layperson or even a somewhat educated person that's doing science reporting, doesn't know a lot about archaeology, this is not like, oh, and reptile people are ruling the world. Like, it doesn't jump out at you like that. So I can see why, once it got through the peer-reviewed journal, I'd be very curious who reviewed it. I could see why it got covered. So that is something I think we should say.
Reviewer number 3 was definitely asleep at that point.
I don't want to comment on that.
No, it's a joke. It's a meme joke. Reviewer number 3.
Yeah.
No, I think the word we're looking for here is this article is very dog whistly. Because like Jeb was saying, it doesn't out and out come out and say certain things, but it's there if you know what you're looking at.
And the one part we didn't really discuss much. So we talked about like Graham Hancock and Andrew, but there are some archaeologists, not most. The vast majority of people who have looked at this do not support this, but who tie this into this idea that there was a cometary. I mean, this is what they're talking about: a cometary strike in the Eastern North America, and they point to some specific geological elements, and they talk about, was it nano diamonds and other things?
Diamonds,
yeah, there are some people that support that. I actually went to one of the presentations on this at the SAA, and I remember the room being absolutely packed, like to the point where they probably should have called the fire marshal. So archaeologists were presenting this, and they were very interested in it. The crowd was huge. At the same time, there were lots and lots of skepticism, and that skepticism has largely grown. There was an article a few years ago that was pretty much like, yeah, we don't find any evidence of this. But this is also something you see in the press from time to time, like, oh, this killed off all the mammoths, or, oh, this killed the Clovis people, instead of, Clovis being a projectile point that then changes into another projectile.
It makes a good story. So
yeah.
One thing I will give the media in this, and I highlighted it a few times in the notes that I'll be sharing with you guys, the 2 articles that I read, both of them said at the end, one of them brought up the nano diamonds and was like, but this has largely been debunked. That was their words, not ours. And then the other article said,
you mean one of the news stories, not the research article we're talking about.
Right. One of the news articles that was on the internet brought up the nano diamonds and then immediately said that the nano diamond idea had been largely debunked.
That's gotten a lot of press, so I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah, and another one of the articles that I read specifically ended their article with, this is a great story, but it's still mostly speculation. So even though these were multi-paragraph articles that were written favorably towards the article that we are discussing, their conclusions, they did go out of their way to put a skeptical statement in the article itself.
There was a skeptical note, yeah.
Yeah, there was a skeptical nod, but they didn't break it down, not like we're doing. And I don't know, I guess I don't expect them to do that, but it would be nice if they would.
Well, no, and I think that's why we're in this business. I mean, I saw Sharon Hill put on Facebook a few days ago a good, solid article about science communication. And one of the things that stood out, they talked about how very frustrated scientists can be with the media and why this is a real problem, and that journalists actually have to sort of learn how to speak scientist. But one of the things that stuck out at me was a paragraph that talked about, and increasingly scientists are realizing they kind of have to cut out the middleman and do some of this themselves.
Yeah, we do.
Which is what we're doing.
Just today, I read about. I wish some course like this was offered when I was in university. But the university I studied on just offered today a course on science communication specifically for archaeologists.
Oh,
so
nice.
The stuff is there, so we're doing it. So we're looking into a bright future.
Yeah, no, and that's great. That's exactly what we need. We need to. Those of us who are out of school need to learn how to use social media and learn how to use the media to our advantage. And those of us who are still in school need to be educated on ways to successfully do that. So in the future, we don't have to rely on secondhand reporting on something where, like with Jens's project, where they're running a blog to tell you what they're doing so that you can follow it firsthand and you don't have to worry about getting secondhand information.
And I will say, as somebody who's looked at quite a bit at the history of archaeology recently, you will see it actually used to be more common in the past for archaeologists to get in media. I think they had more access, and two, they seem to be more willing. So like Sir Leonard Woolley would like write popular books about archaeology and do BBC interviews, and Mortimer Wheeler kept winning like awards because he had amazing facial hair. He kept winning awards for like top entertainer or top television personality in the 1950s, and he would very charismatically present on this stuff. And that has, for multiple reasons, come to an end. And it's not just archaeologists not wanting to reach out. It's also a change in the media ecology, where once you would go get a scientist of any kind, in starting in the 1990s especially, there was increasingly, well, let's just get somebody who's good on TV and they can just present it rather than get a specialist. There are multiple reasons for this, and that's a bigger topic than this discussion.
Right.
But now that you don't need to go land a TV contract, now that you don't need to do this, you can instead do what we're doing and what Jens is doing with the Tepe telegrams, get that stuff out there ourselves. That has to happen.
Yeah. So on that note, Jens, you guys are going back out. You're still working at Göbekli Tepe. So what are your plans in the future for that site?
Actually, the team is right now preparing to continue field work, but at the moment there are shelters constructed over the excavation areas just for protection reasons. All the stuff was covered the last 12,000 years. Now these archaeologists came and pulling everything out of the soil, and it starts to rain. And well, it was better protected the last 12,000 years than the last, let's say, 5 years.
Right.
So now there are shelters constructed to just keep everything nice and have some. Well, Turkey really wants to present this to tourists. I can completely understand this.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
This is why we're not exactly going back into big excavations right now. Maybe just some minor sondages here and there. But it offers us the great opportunity to finally tidy up the find depots and the storage rooms and go through 20 years of material and hopefully come up with a shelf full of monographies by the end of this research period. So which
some people will then completely ignore because they're doing this. But no, that you bring up a great point there that I don't think we've actually addressed. Conservation. Everybody thinks, we're going and digging. Conservation is an often overlooked and very important part, or should be, of ethical archaeology.
Yeah, the days of dig it and forget it are gone. So we have the responsibility for the stuff we are unearthing, and this includes to make sure that future generations also have something to look at. Yeah.
And you're also responsibly writing up what you're finding.
Yeah, exactly. Because, well, you can have the greatest finds, but if they're stored in a cellar, in a damn cellar, in some carton or a box, no one ever will know about it. Yeah.
The amount of that happens would probably, frankly, shock. We always get accused of covering stuff up. No, we actually just end up dying before we write it up. That's actually the bigger loss of knowledge than any kind of covert cover-up.
because archaeologists are inherently pack rats.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not even going to get into that.
We've got a lot of skeletons in the closet, literally. So.
Yes, absolutely, literally. I wanted to ask a question. This is sort of not random, but not in our ethical blah blah. You mentioned 2 seasons a year. Is that just because of like the academic and professional calendar, or is that also weather based?
It's also weather-based, so we once spent June and July there, but that's it's ridiculous. You only basically work from 4 to 10 in the morning because otherwise there's no chance to stand the heat. So spring and autumn, it's basically for climate reasons. Yeah.
Man, that's dedication. Getting up at 4 in the morning to go dig. That props.
Yeah. And so it's temperature more than rainfall. Like where I work in Latin America, you can work somewhat in the rainy season, but there are some fairly obvious problems with that. So even though it's cooler, you can't work in the rainy season. So that's our big thing for seasons.
The rain starts in late October, early November. But now with the new roofs, we actually are independent from weather and heat. Yeah.
Nice.
That's pretty cool though that you guys are getting some permanent structures out over the site. I mean, that's gonna be a game changer.
It will also help to get tourists right close to the site without actually into the site. So that's quite a good solution. Yeah.
They did the same thing at the classic period village of Joya de Serem, which it's often been called the New World Pompeii because it was destroyed in the 7th century by localized volcanic eruption. And they have a very similar setup, and it's really cool.
Well, and I know that there's out west, I want to say in Utah, but I'm not positive, there's the Dino Dig, which is a permanent giant permanent site. Well, I mean, it's not a permanent site, but it's got permanent buildings. So if someone wanted to get involved with your group, Jens, or they want to come out and they want to study Göbekli Tepe, how would they go about doing that? I mean, even if it's just someone who casually, like, maybe they do have one of these crazy ideas and they're like, hey, I want to go see the site for myself. How do they do that?
Well, for one, you find our contact address on the blog, actually.
Okay.
And also, there are also links to our other academic profiles and so on. There are also directions how to visit Göbekli Tepe.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So from where it shouldn't actually be hard to make your way to the site once it's reopened again for public visitors. And yeah, if you've got some not too crazy ideas, we always love to hear about what people think about our work. So read our blog, comment the blog posts. So we often, not always, but often we try to answer comments, serious comments to be honest. But yeah, get into touch.
Excellent. You mentioned tourism. Again, out of curiosity, like what's the sort of tourist flow that you get when you're there?
It changed. I think in 2011 or 2012, not coincidentally with the National Geographic story.
Yeah. They had a big cover story with the big T shape right on the front. I use that picture in my lectures. Yeah.
Okay. So tourism suddenly increased. So we had a lot of English or European and let's say Western tourists, American tourists as well. But with the onset of the conflict in Syria, this dropped again. So while we had like 1,000 visitors a day, which is a problem on an active excavation site. Actually.
Yeah, that's huge.
That's good.
We now have basically just a couple of local visitors. Well, at the moment, the site is closed anyway. But when it was open 2 years ago, we basically had like 4 foreign visitors and a couple of local visitors. So tourism certainly is in a very dramatic situation right now due to the conflict.
When I worked in San Andres in El Salvador, which is this one of the big sites, it's not the biggest, it's one of the biggest sites in El Salvador, but it's right next to the Pan American Highway and not terribly far from the capital. We would have tons of school kids come out, and that can get very complicated, because you're having an open dig site and then 300 people show up. And if you're getting 1,000, wow.
Well, not at the same time, but over a day. But
yeah.
So I think the most we had were like 8 or 9 of these large coaches crawling up the dust hill. So it's demanding.
That's pretty impressive. Do you have a full-time PR person at the site when you guys are active, or do you just kind of throw someone to the lions when the tour buses show up?
Well, there are guards on the site, which are in the meantime also trained in some kind of tourism management. But of course, tourist groups, as soon as they spot an archaeologist.
Oh my God, an archaeologist! Yeah. How do you think
surrounded.
That's how I improved my Spanish, because I kept telling the same damn story every day for like 6 months at Campana San Andres.
Sounds familiar, actually.
Yep.
All right, well, Jens, do you have any final thoughts about this article and the reality and the fantasy of Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah. I mean, I did not do this to slap anyone in the face. So if people have ideas, I encourage people to come up with ideas, think about stuff. We're specialists, but sometimes we're maybe too much of a specialist and don't see the things left and right of the path we're following. So come up with ideas, but please at least consider the stuff we are writing as well. And if you get into touch, try to show respect for our work as well, as we are trying at least to listen to what you might have in mind. Yeah.
I think that's a good sentiment there, actually. Show some respect for the stuff that has come before you, and we will listen to the stuff that you have to tell us. I like that.
And I mean, all archaeologists come up with crazy ideas.
Of course. That's
our job. And then we go, there's a piece of evidence that says no. All right, fine.
Exactly. Consider the evidence. That's all I'm asking. Come up with ideas, but if you find evidence that's contradicting your idea, be fair enough and say, okay, maybe it's not such a good idea.
Jeb, final thoughts?
No, I think that is a fantastic place to leave this. And my final thought would be the fact that we were able to get this out. I am so excited we're able to get you to talk about this in kind of like a breaking news sort of way. Yeah, timely manner. We often talk about things that are not so timely, and this is a interesting sort of deviation of that. So I very much, Jens, want to thank you so much, and keep on doing the public stuff you're doing and getting that word out there, because that is just awesome.
Thank you, and thank you for actually inviting me to the show. It really was a pleasure to finally have a voice in this, because apparently no one was interested to listen to what we have to say about this.
I want to put a shout out. I think did you know David Anderson? Is that how you got in touch with us?
Yeah, David recommended him to us.
Yeah, I just want to put a shout out then. So thank you, David, for helping making this possible.
Absolutely.
Well, Jens, thank you very much. And if you ever want to come back on the show and give us an update on what you guys are doing, or if there's a new weird topic that you just want to talk about, you let us know, and we'll be glad to have you back on.
Yeah, same for you. If you've got more questions, I'm happy to answer. So really, really was a pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by ARCHAEOASTRONOMY Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher, and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archyfantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archyfantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archyfantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at archyfantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archyfantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
At your job, do you ever have to deal with a nose roller? How about a snub pulley? Well, if you're installing a new conveyor belt system, dealing with the different components can sound like you're speaking a foreign language. Luckily, you've got a team ready to help. Grainger's technical product specialists are fluent in maintenance, repair, and operations. So whenever you want to talk shop, just reach out. Call, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.